And welcome to another exciting tutorial. Today we're going to be jumping into Unreal and getting our animations out of Blender. Let's do it. Okay, so in order to get animations out of Blender, there's a lot of things we need to talk about. And we're going to talk about this episode, understanding the NLA editor, which is the nonlinear animation editor in Blender, and how we have to use that to get our animations prepped to come over. And then we're going to go into Unreal and we're going to actually talk about the sequencer, and we're going to get all of the animation set up, including the animation on our materials. We're going to cover a lot of great tips, a lot of great things about how that whole process works. And yeah, it's going to be really, really worthwhile. So let's get started. Let me just show you what I've got over here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring over Unreal. I've been messing around a little bit with some things I want to talk about. So I've put a few things in our scene. I'm just going to kind of turn them on as we go. So this is what the scene looks like once you bring everything in. And of course, we can't see anything. So I'll just turn on some of these lights here. I've gone ahead and done some lighting. This is what how the lighting looks here. So I'm going to switch to game mode. There we go. You can also get the different view modes up here. So I've just switched. Game view just hides all of our objects and stuff. So it's all come in really nicely. The geometry works. I've set all of my imported objects to stationary, and I've taken all of my lights and I've set them to movable. The first thing now I want to go into is, okay, how do we start getting our animations over from Blender into Unreal? So we've got two animations we need to deal with. We've got our hollow table animation, and then we've got the door animation. So let's jump over into Blender. In order to get animation out, we've got to understand a really fundamental system in Blender, which is the NLA editor, the non-linear animation editor. Okay, so let's switch over to under animation. You get all these different things here. We're going to go dope sheet first. The dope sheet is basically, it's a term that comes from traditional 2D animation, and the dope sheet was like a piece of paper that they would outline what were the timing of the different frames they were going to draw. So how far apart were the keyframes, how far apart were the in-betweens, the different drawings they were going to do. This isolates it to just what's selected. If you turn it off, you can see everything in the scene, even if nothing's selected. So there's all the keyframes in our scene. It's a lot of keyframes. Now the dope sheet's got a couple of different drop downs, and the one that we're going to focus here on is the action editor. Now, what is the action editor? The action editor basically breaks down all the different animations in our scene under different actions. And if I do this little drop down menu, you can see we've got camera.001 action, we've got camera action.002. These namings have kind of just been it's happening on the fly. That's why they're a bit weird. Hollow table action. This can be a little confusing at first because it looks so similar to the dope sheet. You're thinking, okay, it feels like it's just like a narrowed view of your keyframes, right? But it's actually a lot more than that. It's really, really powerful. And that's because the action editor works hand in hand with something called the NLA editor, which is the nonlinear animation. Now, let's have a look at this. So I'll drag this up a bit more so you can see it. So what is all this? All right, so the NLA editor, the idea behind it is you can create actions and push them down into the NLA editor, and then you can like mix and match those actions and blend them together. It's like a way of animating preset animations and then using them in like an editor, basically. Like you've got your bin of animations and you're bringing them out and you're putting them together. Easiest way to demonstrate this is actually not going to be in our scene here. It's going to be if I create a fresh scene with just some simplified objects. So let me do that real quick. All right, so we've got no animation in our scene whatsoever. Let's find out what happens if we make some. So let's take our cube and let's hit I for a keyframe. Frame 50, grab up and hit I again. Okay, so I've got a simple animation. Now, what happened when we did that? It's created this thing called cube action in the action editor. So nothing really has happened in the dope sheets, just kind of showed us what the keyframes are. I can open up my summary and it shows me everything that we've done. The action editor here has created this thing called cube action. If I go to my dropdown, you can see there's no other things in the action editor. And then up here in the NLA, we've got this thing. It's like a orange bar with two dots. What is that? And it says cube action, N cube, right? So this name, of course, is corresponding with the action, which makes sense. And this is corresponding with the object, which makes sense. You can see the same information's here, cube action and cube. Great, fine. Let's see what happens if we make a new animation. So I'll go forward to frame 80 and we'll grab him on the X over here and I'll hit I. Cube action's developed a bit. It's got another keyframe here. I could actually open this up. You can see it's looking exactly like our dope sheet. Let's say I create a new object. I'll create a plane. I'll scale it up. Okay, and what's happened? I've created this new object and I've selected it. Well, you can see that this is still up here. This hasn't changed, but of course we don't see any keyframes here or here anymore. Mostly because we've got selected turned on, right? If I turn off isolate or only show me what's selected, then it's going to show me everything that's animated in the dope sheet, but it doesn't show me everything that's animated in the action editor. So the action editor is more specific. Okay. Now in my drop-down option, I've got my action up here, cube action, which is this guy. All right. So let's just set a keyframe for this plane. We get I to set a keyframe, and on frame 105 for our plane. And maybe we'll scale this one up. I'll head into the keyframe for scale. And what's happened? Well, okay, we've got a new layer here on a nonlinear action editor for plane, and we've created a new automatically made a new action called plane action. And let me scale it up. And I'll move forward first. Frame 150. I'll scale it up. Hit I. Boom. We got a new keyframe. And okay, so our animation's playing like we would expect it to. And now we got this new action. We'll check out my dropdown. I've got cube action and plane action. Interesting. Okay, so let's deselect everything. I will select my cube again, right? And I could keep adding on to my cube animation, but let's try changing the visibility setting, right? So over here on my filters, I'm going to turn on render and viewport. And for cube, I'm going to hit I and I for that, and then I'll move forward and I'll turn them off so I make it disappear. And what happens there? Okay, so again, it adds it to cube action. So every time you add animation to an object, when you're working in this way, it's just going to keep piling it into whatever the action is associated with that object that it's created. So what is an action? An action it's a chunk of animation that's saved for an object. Well, it's not even that. It's a chunk of animation that's just saved. So it's not even really has to be related to an object. We can rename them and stuff. So let's go to our cube, and I'm going to call this move up, over, and off. All right, so because that's what happens to this, right? Now, check this out. I can select my object here, my plane, and now I've got plane action selected. If I select this and hit play, now my plane is going to be inheriting that animation. So I could take my cube, and with cube selected, I could switch to plane action. And now cube's just going to scale up. So you can see what's happened is it's actually taken the animation data from that we've saved, and it's applied it to the new object. And that's really, really powerful. Stashing it is like, I don't want to use this now. I want to save it for later. Pushing it down means I want this to happen here just like I've animated it. I want it to be in my scene. Let's see what happens when we push down. So I click push down, and boom, it moves from this down to this. So this track is the action editor itself. So whatever animation you've got stored in here is in the action editor. When I push it down, it leaves the action editor, okay? And it goes into an NLA track, which is basically like a layer. And you can create a lot of these. So I could assign plane action, or actually let's even just make a new one. So I'm going to click new, and I'm going to be ahead of Blender. And so instead of letting it create one for me when I add keyframes, I'm just going to create a new action with no keyframes. And I'm going to call this rotate. And I want this to rotate my cube. So I'll go to my transform settings here, and I'll hit an I for my first keyframe. I'll rotate like that, and then I'll hit another I. So now he's going to rotate as he flies around. Okay. And so now what I can do is I can push down this one, and it's created a new NLA track for me. Now what's cool about it is I can drag this around. So I could say, actually, I want that rotate to start at the beginning. So I'm going to move it right to here. So now he rotates and slides off. All right. So here we are back in our scene, and I've just got our NLA editor set up here and the action editor. And I've just closed down all the other objects on our NLA editor just so we could just look at the hollow room rig, because that's what we want to bring across first. Now, if you were to just select your animation, or select the rig, and then the geometry that's inside of it by control clicking each of them, and then go File, Export, you're going to be exporting all that stuff over into Unreal, and then you're going to get there and none of your animation is going to be there. And it's going to be really confusing because it's here. You can see it and you're clicking on Export Animation. So what's going on? The reason that it's not coming across is because Unreal is specifically looking for action strips in the NLA editor. And when I say action strips, I don't mean animation in your action editor. I mean something that's been pushed down into the NLA. So it's only looking at the nonlinear editor, the NLA editor, okay? So that's why you got to get your animation into here before it's going to function for you properly. So how do we do this? First thing we do is we can look at our Holorum rig action. We can go ahead and rename it. If I switch over to pose mode, actually, if I turn off selected, we can see all the keyframes there. So this is the whole animation for our rig, everything that we've done in our scene. And I'm just going to call this hologram animation. There we go. You can see it's renamed it here as well because this is, what's in our action editor. And I can go ahead and just push it down. I don't want to stash it because I don't want to use it later. I want to actually use it now, and I want to use it at this exact timing that we've animated. So I'm going to click push down. You can also just do that push down from here. It's the same thing. So it removes it from our action editor, from our dub sheet, everything. Those keyframes aren't gone. They've just been pushed down into our NLA editor. Now, if you ever wanted to edit something once you've got it into your NLA editor, you can actually hit tab to enter edit mode for that track, and everything's going to come back in your action editor. It'll show you working on hologram animation, and you can tweak the values here and then hit tab to go back out of it. Now, of course, we could drag this and move it around, but we don't want to do that. We want to keep it right at the beginning because that's how we want our animation to play out. And that's all we got to do. So now that we've done that, we can now export this animation over into Unreal. Okay, so let's do that. So we select the Holorum rig, Holorum table, Holorum, and red blip. We're going to go File, Export, FBX, and then you navigate to where you want to put your file. We're going to go Selected Objects Only. And then we want to go to Geometry. Again, we want to select Face, and that's going to make sure the faces, everything comes in properly. We want to Apply Modifiers. That's cool. And then under Armature, we want to make a few changes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to turn off Add Leaf Bones, okay? And that's just for some, if you wanted to edit stuff, I don't know, it's for other applications, but it can mess things up and you get some warnings. So you just turn that off because we're not worrying about changing any of this animation in Unreal. We've got it set up here in Blender. This is how we want it. So we're just going to turn off Add Leaf Bones. This would just add in some bones to designate the end position of objects. So it's just a way that Unreal can understand the armature in a different way. Baking the animation. All right, so we want to have this turned on. Now we want to key all bones and want to get all the NLA strips. That's correct. We actually want to turn off all actions. What all actions will do is it'll bring in everything that's in our action editor, which is everything for everything that we've recorded. All right, so once we've made those selections and we've set that all up, now we can just click on Export FBX. All right, and sometimes with animation, it can take a little while, so you just want to make sure it's okay by moving the timeline, but you see mine's moving fine, so we're all good. I'm going to jump over to Unreal now. All right, over in Unreal, I'm just going to right-click in my content browser. Now, once we've got our import settings pop up, there's a couple things we want to make sure you've got selected. We want to have skeletal mesh selected, which says that, okay, look, there's a skeleton here. It should detect that automatically. You just want to make sure that's picked. You want to make sure that there is no skeleton here selected. Okay, this is really important. If you've already got some animation imported with some rigs or some skeletons, it's going to default to one of those sometimes. And you want to just make sure you've got that turned off, set to none. Okay, so it's not going to get confused and try making your animation work with a different skeleton. Then we want to go here to import animations. You want to go ahead and tick that box. Okay, so now it's going to bring in the animations. And that's it. We're going to click import all, and we're going to get a couple of things in our scene. We've got our holotable object itself. So I'll just double click that and I'll show you what we've got. So here we are. This is the object itself. It's got a skeleton that's brought in, which is the skeleton that we created. And then we've got the mesh. And then we've got here animation. All right, so this is how you know it's worked correctly. You can have a look and it should be playing the animation here. It's going to list out all the different animations. Now, holotable _ anim. All right, so what is that? This name is based on the actual name of the FBX file that we exported, so not the name that we gave it in our NLA strip. And then a physics objects, which because it's got animation, anything with animation comes in with a physics object. It's set it to capsule, and this is just to help it with collisions and stuff if you're going to use it for that. All right, so if I close this and we go ahead and bring it into our scene, and I'm going to zero out the location and everything for it. Now, there's no playhead. I can't like hit play to watch this animation, right? So we need to introduce the sequencer. The sequencer is basically how you can set up animations to play back in your scene. So what we need to do is go up here to Cinematics, and we're going to add new level sequence. All right, it's going to ask you where does it want it's saved in your project files. So I've put everything so far in Virtual Reality BP, and we've got maps here and assets, and this is the folder that everything's in. So I'm just going to put that in here so we've got everything. And I'm going to call this the Bounty Hunter Den. I'll just give it the name of the project. I'll click Save. And here we go. It opens up for us. So this is the sequencer. The sequencer is basically a timeline, just like in Blender. Okay, we've got a play, we've got stop, we've got all these options and things. And now we want to add stuff to it. So you click on track here, and this adds a track. And now we want to add an actor to the sequence. Now, which actor do we want to add? We got all these other things we could add. We can add audio, events, camera cuts, shots, fades. Like there's a ton of different things that you can put in here. But we want to add an actor. Which one do we want? We want make sure we get the right name, the holotable actor. And yep, there it is, right at the top. So we'll go ahead and select that actor. Now you also notice that holotable, it's brought it in automatically as movable, not as a static object. And that's because it has animation on it. And that's really important. You got to make sure it's set to movable. Anyway, so now we've got that object, but we don't have our animation yet because you have to then select which animation, because you might have a lot of different animations. We could come up with a bunch of animations for this object. We could import them, right? And save them as different strips in our NLA editor. Because they're all using the same rig, the same bones, I could import those as FBXs and say, actually, this time don't import the mesh itself. Just import the rig animation data. And then you can apply all those different animation data to different points. So you could have a character, let's say, and you could have different animations for different points for that character, and you could queue those up on the timeline. All right, so let's first have a look at what we've got. We've got this big thing that's introduced. Now, this is the strip of animation. So I can change when it starts if I wanted it to play later. You can actually change the length of it by dragging on these different things. Our timeline is only set to end at frame, 165, I think. So my view is restricted to that. So I'm going to change this number up to 600, and I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to drag out this guy, which is the end of our animation. And I'm just going to drag it so it corresponds with the end of the actual animation there. There we go. Cool. Now, I could stick this somewhere. I could probably pop it down here. It's probably a good idea. And now I could hit play. And what's going to happen is it's going to play back the animation, just as we've done it. So that's really cool. Now you can see we'll need to custom animate when things turn on and off, but we can do that with parameters. But yeah, it works out really well. Now we want our timelines to match. So let's see how many frames we've got in Blender. So our Blender scene is running on 350 frames, and our Unreal scene is running on 600. Wait a minute, what's that all about? So this is actually not working on the same frames per second, so we need to change that. So Blender's frames per second, we've got our scene set up for, there we go, 24 frames a second. So let's go back to Unreal, and we'll change it right up here. We're going to say 24 frames per second. Okay, and we know that our timeline goes till 350 in Blender. So I can just find 350. There we go. And now our timeline is going to match. So the animation starts there and then plays out. But what happens? At the end, it pops back to its default position. Now, why is that? Well, that's just a setting here in the sequencer itself. So we need to actually change the way this thing behaves. If you right click on it, you can actually change a lot of different behaviors for what happens after. So post infinity. So what happens when it ends and goes on till infinity? So constant. Okay, it's going to keep a constant state. You could cycle, so we could have it just cycle back. So keep looping the animation, and then we could select that and then like just drag it out. And then what's going to happen is when it reaches the end, it's going to go back to the beginning. But I don't want to do that. What I want is for it to just keep its state permanently once it ends. So I want it to get to here and then stick around. So to do that, I'm just going to take post infinity, put it back to constant. So right here in the properties at the top, we have when finished project default. I'm going to switch this to keep state. Okay. And once I've done that, now it's going to allow me to keep that state. So if I hit play, it's just going to hold that position. Perfect. Okay. We've brought that animation in. It's looking good. Let's do the same thing for our door. Now, in order to get the door to work, we need to have the, switch back to object mode. In order to get the door to work, what we need to do is we need to have the door's animation needs to be in the NLA editor, but there's a couple other requirements that it needs. Now, one thing you might notice is you could animate a cube like we did in our example scene, push it down into the animation into the NLA track, and then export that thing over into Unreal, and it's going to work. You're actually going to get that animation over without having to create a rig and go through all the craziness that we went through to get this animation to work. There's a couple of gotchas that really can mess you up, and one of those is there's an inconsistency in the way it brings over the animation. Having a rig keeps it consistent. It unifies everything, and it allows Unreal to know, okay, this is exactly how you want this animation to behave. This is exactly what this animation data means when it's looking at what you send over. If you don't have a rig on your object and you just bring it over like this, it can do all kinds of weird things to the way it interprets what you've brought over, especially when it comes to scale sizes, and it just lacks consistency. So always do a rig of some kind for your objects. So even though this has just got shape key information on it, we need to give it a rig just for safety. Okay. So what we can do is we can select our door, hit Shift S to get this pop-up menu, which I'm sure you all wish I have been using from the very beginning. But just out of habit, I always use F3 and then type on, whatever. But yeah, here it is. Shift S brings up our little cursor radial menu, and I can just go cursor to active. And now I can go Shift A, make sure my, let's see, where do I want to put this? I'm going to stick this in, well, where's our door? Let's find it. Door blades. All right, we'll put it in room. And I'm going to hit Shift A, armature, and I'm going to call this door. So I'll switch to bones. If you remember from the previous episode, we just need to make the size of that bone a little bit bigger. There it is. So let me just make sure. Yep. Okay, cool. So we've got a bone right there. Perfect. All right. Now I can select on the door blades and then control click door armature, control P, and we're going to parent with automatic weights. All right. Now we're not going to do any animation on this door armature, but in order to get it to behave and push down as an action strip, we actually need some kind of keyframe on it. So let's just find it real quick. So let's go to, where is it? Our door blade. So you can see it's not even listed in our NLA animator, right? And that's because there is no animation on this armature whatsoever. So we have to go to pose mode, select the only bone in the entire thing, and just hit I to set a keyframe for, let's say, location. Why not? Okay, so we've got the door armature, that single keyframe that we just made right here in our action strip for the door armature. And then we've got over here, this is the key action, right, which is the door opening. Now, the weird thing that we need to do to make this work is it's just kind of it's a quirk of shape keys, of using shape keys. So in the action editor itself, what we need to do is we need to have, for door armature, we need to have a keyframe that spans the amount of time that this animation happens. And the reason for that is Unreal's not going to, if you push this key down as an action, okay, and now we've got this door open effect as an action key, it's not going to come across correctly. And what we need to do is actually have some animation on our armature. If we push down this animation now, it's just going to be a single keyframe moment here. And Unreal's only going to bring in this little bit of animation. We need to have a strip that's going to last long enough that this is going to be on frame. So I'll show you. It's probably a bit easier to explain it. So if I'll go back to pose mode, and I'll select my door armature, pose mode. There we go. Select the bone, and I'm just going to grab this keyframe so that it starts before I need it to, before this thing happens. And then I'll go to after it happens, and I'll just set another keyframe for this bone. Actually, I could just select the keyframe and Shift D and drag this out. Okay, so now I've got a strip that lasts longer than my shape key animation. All right, so now if I push this one down, now I've got this door armature animation, which really doesn't have any animation in it at all. It's just two keyframes that are exactly the same, but it's taking place over the period of time that this happens. And now what's going to happen is when we bring this animation in, I can include the shape keys as a part of this animation. It's going to bring in animation here, and it's going to also then bring in these shape keys. So it's a little confusing, that little extra bit that you have to do, but hopefully it makes sense after having explained these other bits and how this all fits together. So I'll show you how that works now. So if I select on my door and then my door blade, my armature and my door blade, and I go File, Export, and we're going to export FBX again. Again, make sure select as only selected, geometry set to face, armature, add leaf bones is turned off, bake animation, everything except for all actions. All right, great. And I'm going to name this the door. Okay, now I get this little pop-up, of course, and you can see the problem that I mentioned before. It's automatically defaulted to hollow table skeleton, which isn't correct. It's not the same skeleton at all. So we need to make sure that we clear this out. Okay, so it needs to say none. Always make sure you do that. Import animations will be still ticked because we ticked it already once. It's going to default to being ticked on. But we need to add something else. So we need to go to this little drop-down menu, open it up, and we need to find where it talks about shape keys. Okay, so let's see. Another term for shape keys is morph targets. I'll drop this one down. There it is. Okay, so it's under this main one, under mesh here. Import morph targets. Okay, so now we can tick that. And now it's going to import the shape key animation that we had. Okay, so click import all. And in they come. And we've got our door, the material that was assigned to the door. And then we've also got this door animation. So if we just double click this, we can check it. And sure enough, it's working fine and looks good. Great. So you can see what's happened is it's brought in this door animation track, but there's no other tracks. See, it hasn't brought in 2 tracks of animation, even though we've got 2 tracks of animation on this door object. But what it's done is it's brought in these shape keys, and the shape keys you can see are right here. That's what this curve is, and it's the door open shape key. So it's actually grabbed the shape key name that we labeled it as, but that's it. So that's really important. You need to have an armature that your object with shape keys is assigned to, and you need to have keyframes on that armature that are at least bigger than or take place over a longer period of time than your shape key animation. And then you'll be able to import with the morph targets and it'll work correctly. Okay, so that's the only kind of bit that's a little bit convoluted and not quite straightforward. So let's go ahead and drag that in. So we'll put in our door in the scene. We'll zero out its position, and then just go to where we can actually see it. And then we can go to our sequence editor here. We can add in a new track, and we can go bring in our door. And then I can add in for under animation, select my door animation sequence. And there it is all the way over here. And we want to make sure it's set to the correct frame. We need to do it from the first frame of this, not this. Okay, so 314 is actually where it should begin. So if we go to 314, we can actually just type it in here, 314, and then we can pop this to 314. Okay, yeah, great. Now it's going to behave appropriately. All right, so let's see if that worked. We just hit play on our timeline here. Spacebar doesn't do it. And boom, there it is. It opens up. Now, again, we need to do that same thing as before. So right click, properties, and we want to go when finished, keep state. Okay, so now it opens. Okay, so we've got all of our animation in the scene. Now let's finish our setup. Now, what we need to do is let's go to, where is our VR pawn? Okay, so the VR pawn, of course, is the object that, turn off game view, where our character, our user will spawn, right? And we want to bring that into the right spot. So I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to switch over to rotation here. And I'm going to rotate 180 degrees. And I'll just position this over a bit and down a bit. And now I snuck in a bit earlier and I had a quick look, and the scene actually feels a bit too small still. So somehow our scale's gotten off a little bit in terms of our modeling. I think what happened was we've started modeling the table, the floor we raised up a bit, and I don't know, we just kind of lost track of the scale. I should have been jumping back and forth a bit more frequently to really nail that, but that's okay, because what we can do is I can actually select all of my meshes and all of my lights and anything else. I need to get my 2 animated objects, my door and hollow table, and that's it. And I can just go right here to scale for all of them, and I can just go up to, we'll try 1.2. And that should be all good. Now you can see as well that that hasn't affected our animation. Our animation still works, even though we've scaled everything up. Still looks good. Yeah. Let's go ahead and get our room material set up, the hologram material from before. I need to go ahead and assign that and import all those. So I'll go ahead and get that sorted, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay, I've gone ahead and brought in my material for my hollow table. This is just the baked out material from Blender for the hologram. So if you remember before, I've said this to be translucent, and I've applied this to the opacity. So That's all working great, but now we're actually going to run into a problem when we get to reflections. Now, we haven't turned on reflections yet. I don't know if you've noticed that there are no reflections in the scene at the moment. There's a couple of reasons for that. But in order to get reflections to work, what we're going to need to do is actually have this be a different type of material, which actually causes some problems for how we've done this. And anyways, I've got a little workaround for you that I'll show, but we'll get to reflections in a minute. So we now have our animation set up, but we want to have the object disappear. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to animate a property within our shader for this object. So a hologram v2 shader. Now, the only way to animate properties in Unreal that are in a material, you need to use something called a material parameter collection. So right down here, material parameter collection track, we've only got one here, and this is the teleport MCP. This is the base one that's set up for the virtual reality controller. So we need to make our own, and I will show you how to do that. All right, if we go to materials and textures, so right click in your content browser, go to materials and textures, and we're going to create a material parameter collection. Here it is, and we're going to call this, we'll call this our fade out, okay? Or actually, we'll call it fade in, or fade control. That's a better name. Nice, fade control, love it. All right, so what is this thing? I'll open it up. Basically, we've got some parameters. Right now, it's completely empty. There are no parameters. But if I go, scalar is going to be a single sort of floating point number. Vector is going to be a set of floating point numbers. So if you're doing like R, G, and B, then you would want to have a vector parameter. But we're just going to do a scalar parameter. So I hit plus to make one. And I can open it up, and we've got a couple of things here. We've got two members for this. We've got the default value and the name. So I'm going to call this fade. And the default value of 0, I'm actually going to start it off at 1. Okay, that'll be our default value. Now I will save this and close it. And now I can go into my material, so hologram v2. And what we can do is we can actually just take our fade control and drag it into our material. All right, now fade control right here, move these around. Oops, there we go. This is going to output that base number. So I need to select it. So I've got a couple, we only have one parameter in this collection. So I can select fade, that's the only one. The number, basically that parameter collection can be exposed now in our sequencer. And so we can animate those values directly. So we can animate this value here, whatever this value is. Right now it's just a floating point number. But I'm going to plug this into something that's going to affect the overall opacity for my object. So to do that, what I want to do is I need to basically multiply this number by whatever it is that's going into opacity. So that if this is 0, this becomes 0 and we have a transparent object. So I'm going to right click and type in multiply, and I will grab this one, pipe it into here, grab this one, pipe it into here, and pipe that one into there. So now we're multiplying the fade control. Now the default value, if you remember, we set to 1, so it's not going to change this guy at all. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll select both of these, and I'll hit Control-C to copy. And I'm going to save and then close this out. And now I can open up the shader the material that I've got on my little glowing ball. Now the glowing ball object, what I've done is I've plugged my red material into the emissive, and then I've just set this this object to translucent. And then if you remember from before, I've just turned on wireframe for this one. So I actually didn't bake out the material for the red ball. I've just brought this over as is. But I can do the same thing. I can hit Control-V to paste, and now we've got fade, the same parameter collection, and I can pipe this now into the opacity. And that's going to, actually, we don't even need the multiply, to be honest. I could, but I'll add a constant just so that it's behaving in the same way. And I'll make this constant 1, and then we can test it to make sure it's actually going to work. Okay, now that I've added it into my two materials, if I go over to sequencer, what I can do now is I can expose that particular object. So if I go to add something to my track, and go down to material parameter collection, you can see we've got our new one here, fade control. I can actually now add that in. Now what I can do is I can click on plus for the parameter, and I can add in the parameter that we added called fade. I'll just open it up here. You can see it's set to 1. So it's automatically put a keyframe in as well for that. So what we can do is we can decide where we want it to fade on. So let's match our Blender scene. So where do we have the animation for our fade? All right, so this is the value that we animated for our shader. So okay, it's actually fully visible at 64, and it starts to fade at 323. So if I go to 64, I can drag this keyframe right to frame 64. So now what I can do is go to frame 43, and I could set this value to 0. It's automatically going to make a keyframe, and you can see it's fading on now, just like we want it, which is great. Then what we want to do is set the fade off point. So the fade off is over here, 323. So we'll go to 323, 323, and we're going to just click that little circle in between the two arrows that'll add a keyframe. And we want a value of 1. So 330, and we'll set this to 0. There we go. So now it should all be working together. It fades off, door opens. So yeah, the timing now matches perfectly. All right, so the next thing we need to do is to actually animate this one independently, because we also need it to, we need this one, the red one, to basically disappear sooner. It'll only appear at this point. So we need to add in one more value. So we can go into fade control, and we can click a plus here, and we can open this one up and call it red blip up here. Okay, and we can set the default to 0. Sure, we'll do that. Close that out. Now if we go back into the shader for our red blip, Control W to duplicate this thing, and we can bring in not fade, but red blip up here, okay? And we can use this in the same way. So in fact, we can use this to replace our multiply here, because we don't need this value of 1. This one can be that value of 1 for us. So I can delete that. So now what we're doing is we're multiplying red blip up here by fade. So the fade will still work, so it'll still go 0 to 1, but when this is 0, even if this is 1, it's going to end up being 0. So the fade control, this can override the fade control, basically. The power of maths. Now, don't be alarmed if it takes a while to apply and save the different shaders when you make changes. That's just, I'm cutting a lot of that time out. All right, so let's go back to our sequencer. We want to add in that value. So fade control, click parameter, and here's our new one, red blip up here. All right, so we're going to have this set to 0, basically until the point where it appears. So let's set it to 0 there. I'll go forward to here maybe, and I'll set it to 1. And let's just have a look at its position just to make sure. Yeah, it needs to be off. So I think I'll zoom in, and I might just move these two keyframes. So I'll drag a box around both of them and just drag them forward so that it appears there. That's great. All right. Now, let's see how well that looks. Yeah, great. Now what we can do is we can use this value to actually create our blip as well. So the pulsing on and off value that we had. So we come over here, and when we fade on, what we can do is we can go forward 6 frames. I can set a new keyframe right here. Then if I go back 3, a value here for a red blip up here, that's going to give me a really good look for that pulsating light. So 0.0, maybe 0.01. That looks pretty good. All right, so these 3 keyframes are going to give me the look that I want. Now we might want to do something a little different, because the rendering, it behaves slightly differently in Unreal. So we could maybe pace these out a little bit more. And now, just because we only have it up for a certain amount of time, to keep things simple, we're just going to actually select these 2 keyframes, hit Control C to copy, and actually we'll click all 3, Control C, and then what we can do is just paste, and then paste, paste. Okay, now that we've got all of our animation imported and set up, we've got our sequencer set up, and we've got our materials in place, we need to know how to cue this animation. Because right now when we start, if I hit play, you can see that our program starts running and nothing happens. So our sequencer isn't playing. It doesn't automatically kick off. And that's because sequencer is meant to kind of cue animations at different points. Say you had a game where someone had to interact with something, and it would cause an animation to cue. So you would want to wait for that sequencer to start for when they do that action. So what we want ours to start right at the beginning. So we just select our sequencer here, and I just go down to autoplay. We're going to click tick there. And then also we're going to say pause at the end. And that means that when it gets to the end of the sequencer animation, it's not going to reset back to its base position. It's going to just pause. So now if I hit play, you can see that we start with nothing, and then it all starts to animate. So it's looking good. And this is what we want. When we get to the end, you'll notice that the door will open, and it'll just hold that position for us for as long as the game runs from that point on. Now, one other thing I realized we need to add is the glow table here. So I'm just going to switch quickly into a hollow base table. And I'll just go ahead and grab our fade control and drop it in. And I will hook up our fade control Now we don't want this one to fade out the opacity of the fade control. So we just want to go to fade, and I can now link fade up into, I want to link it to the brightness of the emissive color. All right, multiply and bring that in. And we're going to multiply it by this single value and slide that into the emissive color. All right, now if I just hit play, you can see that everything's turned off and then it all fades on together. All right, thanks so much for watching. I hope you really got a lot out of today's episode, and you've got a really firm idea now of how the NLA editor works and how that works in hand with Unreal and getting our animations in and how to get all that stuff set up. So hope you're excited for the next episode. Next episode, what we're going to be doing is talking about lighting, post-process volumes, getting our nav mesh set up, and basically finishing off our VR scene. So we'll be ending the series in the next episode. So please stay tuned to that. And if you liked this video, please like and subscribe so that I can know that you're into it. And if you want to ring the little bell, you'll get notifications when the next episode comes out. And yeah, I'm really excited about sharing the next one with you. So have a great week, and I will catch you next time.